Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. Hello and welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. My name's Mike Cantrell, and tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. I ran across a copy of the 1959 Captain's Conference for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. In May of 1959, they brought all the captains in the country together and had a conference in Washington, D.C. So what I've done is I know a bunch of captains. I was a captain, so I've brought some more captains together, and I want to discuss this. We'll see what's changed, what they were looking at back then. If prison is still the same as those captains were dealing with, or if some things have changed, maybe we've improved. So I brought three former captains in with me: Gary Cooper, Glen MacDonald, and Dennis Treadway. And I'm going to have you guys introduce yourself, if you don't mind. And I'll start with you, Gary.
Hi, folks. Name's Gary Cooper. Got out of high school, went in the military for 4 years, and went to work for Department of Corrections in Kansas for 2 years, and then had the opportunity to go into the Bureau of Prisons. So I started my career in Raybrook, New York, and I spent about 6 years in Raybrook, New York as a correctional officer, transferred to McKean, Pennsylvania as a lieutenant, transferred to Hazleton, West Virginia as a lieutenant. Went back to McKean and spent a few more years there as a lieutenant, and then went to Greenville, Illinois as a captain, and then finally transferred to Springfield, Missouri, and spent about just under 10 years there as a captain. So I spent about just under 12 years as a captain in the Bureau.
Wow. Excellent. Thank you, Gary. Glenn, introduce yourself.
Glen MacDonald. Yeah, Glen MacDonald. I was in the Marine Corps for just about 6 years. After the Marine Corps, I got on board for FCI Danbury as a cook foreman. Went from cook foreman to Florence, Colorado. Activated the ADX Florence. Was out there for a short time. Actually had to go back to Danbury as an officer because of some family issues. And then went to, Devens as a lieutenant. Devens to Coleman. I get kind of lost here. Coleman to North Carolina. North Carolina to, Pollock to Yazoo. And Yazoo to Chicago. And I ended up 28 years in the Bureau of Prisons. I left as a GS-13 captain from MCC Chicago.
Excellent. Thank you, Glenn. And Dennis, introduce yourself.
All right, my name is Dennis Treadway. I started out my career in the Army, did the Army Reserve for a little over 5 years. Worked at the local sheriff's department in Terre Haute, Indiana, for about little over 2 years. Figured out I needed to make a little bit more money to survive, so I went to the prison there in Terre Haute. Started my career in the Bureau at Terre Haute, Indiana. Worked there for 2 years. Went to Bastrop, Texas, as an officer. Went to Texarkana, Texas. Was Bastrop for 3.5 years. Went to Texarkana, Texas for safety manager trainee. Tried something a little different. Tried to work a day job. Did that for 1.5 years. Went to Englewood, Colorado as assistant manager in safety for 1.5 years. Figured I couldn't afford to live in Denver, and some other things were going on too. So I came back to my desire and came back to lieutenant at USP Leavenworth. Worked there for 22 months. Went back to Terre Haute, Indiana as a lieutenant. Stayed there for 7 years. Came back to Leavenworth as a captain for 4 years, 3 to 4 years. Went to activate AUSP Thompson, where we worked together there for a couple of years, 2.5 years. And then went back to USP Leavenworth and retired as captain there.
I'm interested to hear what your guys' take is on some of this stuff. And so let me jump into it. It was a great idea. We still have captain's conferences in the Bureau of Prisons, so this was not a new idea, although the last captain's conference they had before this one was in 1950. I did find it interesting as I went through some of it, some of the stuff that they were put on their agenda. And one of them was developments in correctional architecture, building of prisons and how to build prisons better. And as we think back, I know I started at Missouri State Penn and started the feds at Leavenworth. Whole different type of architecture with Leavenworth than there is with the newer prisons that we're building in the country. So this was the beginning of some of that. Another one that they have on here is the captain's role on the staff. 1959, I don't think they've still figured that out. Sometimes the captain's, he's just above the lieutenants. He's running the custody portion, and then the next minute he's supposed to be part of the admin, helping the wardens and the AWs, and nobody can ever figure out what that is. Progress in prison medicine, and this is back when they were still using inmates for some of the not testing so much, but they were monitoring them and allowing them to participate in medical trials. So that's kind of interesting. I'm going to start off here with the purpose and goals of the conference. And this is Mr. Alexander, who was the assistant director, which is the number 2 in the Bureau of Prisons at the time. And he says 9 years have passed since the last captain's conference was held in January 1950 at Atlanta. Not one captain who is present at this conference is today a captain. 3 are now wardens, 7 are associate wardens, and others are retired. Several of those who retired were promoted before they left the service. I'm interested. I know Gary and I talked earlier about this, so I'll start there. All the captains in 9 years, all that experience, they've moved on. They're doing something different. A bunch of them are retired. Is that still a problem in the correctional services? Gary?
Well, Mike, I think I think it could be considered a problem. I think one of the challenges of being a captain is there's a lot of pitfalls. We've all been there, and I remember probably back when Treadway and I were making our captains, and they talk about 50% of the captains didn't make it. And I thought, well, that's hogwash until you start really getting into that networking and see that all of a sudden somebody has decided to bust back down to a lieutenant or go be a unit manager. Or back in the day, it was always the captain would go be a DHO if they were not doing so well as a captain. So I think there is a lot of pitfalls. I'm not sure if that's getting any better. It seemed like by the time I was retiring, they were more tolerant of some mistakes. But I can tell you, there's not a more difficult position in the Bureau of Prisons as a captain. So a lot of captains don't make it, or they decide it's not for them. And I'll also say there's not a lot of there's not a lot out there to kind of make you want to be a captain anymore. Everything gets dumped on you, whether it's from the executive staff, deal with other department heads, your lieutenants, down to your lowest, senior officer. So there's a lot of responsibility and not a whole lot holding you there when you've got other departments that supervise 3 or 4 staff and they're making the same pay as a captain. It just makes it tough to see unless you just have that kind of pride and you just love correctional services that much. And I think the 4 of us did, so we stuck around. But that's not the case with the majority of captains. I think the problem with that is you're not retaining your knowledge. It's not just captains, it's lieutenants as well. I mean, they can't get folks that want to be a lieutenant anymore, because they see all the pitfalls and they're dumped on their shoulders without a lot of reward for that or backing from the executive staff.
Right. Glenn, Dennis, either one of you have thoughts on that?
All right. I mean, I agree with Gary a lot. I mean, times have definitely changed, but they've stayed the same. From the conference we read about there, it seemed like most of them went up in promotion. It wasn't that they bowed out and
Yeah.
They tapped out other than, you may have had some retirements. Yeah. Which, I mean, you do your time. You deserve your retirement if it's time to go. We all chose that path, and I think we're all happy we chose it. But like Gary said, so much now, a lot of people that jump into the role may or may not be ready for the role because there's not a lot of accolades for it. And I mean, if you're going into it for accolades, you're not going to get the promotion automatic just because you tried to be a captain. I think we're all proof of that too, in different ways. And same as lieutenants, you can't get people to want to be lieutenants either for the same reasons and rationales. And it does make it tough, And again, not to just say ditto on what Gary said. I mean, it takes a person to want to be the captain, to want to have the respect and responsibility and pride in themselves to try to do the good job, to try to do the right thing, to be a lieutenant or a captain nowadays, more so than before.
They're the one who's really looking out for correctional services. So every time we have one of those captains move up to that administrative role and move out of that section, I think you've lost somebody who is the champion for correctional services and the officers, and they know what it's like to work a SEG unit. And so that's the other thing I see is we end up with this split as people go up that chain. They're not there dealing with correctional services and being that champion for them anymore. But that's my take on it too. Another thing I found interesting at this, go ahead.
I think Hey, Mike, real quick. I think it's also a generational thing. If you go back to that captain's conference in '59, I mean, a lot of those staff were probably World War II veterans or some type of military veteran who couldn't find a good job, and they offered a good job in the government back then, a stable job. And nowadays we really don't have that. We have people coming in from. I mean, we're hiring people just out of college with very minimal experience, if that. Just because they went to college doesn't mean they're going to be a good CO, and then they get promoted through the ranks, and then all of a sudden, oh, I want to be a captain. No, you don't. It's a tough business. We've all been there, and I got a couple cuts and bruises from it, and I'm sure you guys do too. More mental bruises than anything, and then just the way things are. I know I've only been gone. October will be a year for me, but I know right before I left, I actually went from captain to employee development manager just to try something different because I was burnt out. Just like we were saying, everything's on top of you. You got the phone call at 3 a.m. about nothing, and you're like, hey, well, I might as well wake up and go to work, because I'm already awake. I'm already pissed off because you're calling me about some craziness. So I mean, the responsibilities of captains nowadays, I'm sure it's not much different than back in '59, but we have a lot more things now on our hands of the technology part, having a cell phone all the time. You guys been around. We used to have pagers and it's things have changed, but I'm sure it's the exact same thing because when they went into work, I don't know how part of the executive staff they were involved in, or was it just like a rank structure, an actual rank structure back then to where it just stopped at the captain, But now, I mean, before I left, I mean, we're right in the middle of every decision, and sometimes they listened and sometimes they didn't.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point that so many of those officers were vets. They had come back from World War II. They did fill up the Bureau of Prisons. I interviewed one of the guys that worked at Fed Med back in the 50s and 60s, and there was all vets there who understood military structure, who understood chain of command, who understood some of that stuff. We don't have that as much anymore. I wonder if that is part of the difference, that we don't have that military structure like we used to.
I mean, when I came in '93, just straight out of the Marine Corps, I was, yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, and Now everything's questioned. Well, I'm asking you to do this because this is what we have to do. And then it's like, well, why?
Why?
Well, and personally, I see it being more generational period because especially with being at Leavenworth three times and retiring out of Leavenworth, I had plenty of military background there, but you still had the why.
Right.
I don't care who you are or why. They had no problem questioning authority when authority shouldn't have really been questioned, at the time or the place.
Another thing that they mention is that year, riots and disturbances are epidemic this spring. Usually they've involved the seizure of hostages and has happened at Massachusetts, Montana, which I don't even know what that was, or at one or two other scattered points in which they're going to go through the riot and disturbances procedures. That was also the year that Springfield had their riot where 4 staff were taken hostage there in the mental health ward. So it's interesting that that was happening so much at that time, because what happened within a few years of that? That's when DCT SORT showed up a decade later, all our emergency equipment and stuff that we were stacking up in the institutions. So I think that's probably the beginning of that, the fact they were having so many riots. And everybody on here has been on teams, so I know that you've been part of that 30% gear and part of that riot procedures. So let's talk about real quick, and this is the assistant director. Before looking ahead, we can gain some perspective of where we are, as well as a glimpse of the future by glancing back a few years, specifically in 1950 when the first Captain's Conference had its meeting in Atlanta. Then our population was 17,000. He's complaining now because it's 22,000. I don't know the current numbers. What is it? Probably 140? Somewhere around there. But that is an increase of 5,300 inmates, the equivalent of 10 institutions. 530 inmates an institution. I don't know if his math's right. That's an easy day, isn't it? Atlanta and Leavenworth had 2,100 prisoners, compared with now they have 2,700. They were having a lot of trouble with juveniles, and the populations in some of the prisons for juveniles was 3,300. And he's blaming it all on narcotics, which I don't really know what was going on in or later in the 1960s. I guess I think more of the 60s as a drug decade, but they changed a bunch. The average sentence has increased from 23 to 30 months. Narcotic violators have made the greatest contribution to this increase in sentence length, and that's because they passed some new laws. I think we had that happen once in the Bureau of Prisons, not during my reign, but just before, with some of the riots they had with the crack cocaine laws.
The crack laws, yeah, back in '95.
Yeah, Greenville got hit hard. Yep. And another thing they talk about is military prisoners, and we were talking about this a minute ago. In 1950, there were 2,400, but by 1959, there are now 600. So that covers what was going on in the Federal Bureau of Prisons at the time, and now they start into some of their training. And, of course, they're talking about personal development. May be defined as a continuous process of affording each employee an opportunity to enlarge his job experience. I love the way they talk about things back then. But here was something I really liked. And the guy teaching this is in charge of the Bureau's training program, and he says, the program's development emphasis is on improved performance in the present job rather than grooming for a promotion. We just talked about that. We'll talk about that some more. But in this connection, it's important to remember that there is never a situation of no development. There is either desirable or undesirable development. And I think that's a huge statement there. Our officers, no matter what's going on in that prison, we have the opportunity as captains and administrators to either put them in a position to have desirable or undesirable development. You guys know what I'm talking about? A lot of it has to do with who they're around and what we've got set up for them. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I know back when I first started, the big word was upward mobility to get you to that next step, And I think that was lost a long time ago, where you would have time to train people and bring them in and show them how to do work on rosters and or even let you walk around and carry lieutenant keys, for the day, even though you're just shadowing the lieutenant. All that went to the side quite a while ago, from what I remember. And there's this, I just think, I know as far as being a captain and being a lieutenant for a very long time, because I was a captain for just, I think about 8 years or somewhere around there. I think it was hard because you had so many responsibilities put on you, even as lieutenant and even as a captain, because then you got to watch the lieutenants, and then some of the lieutenants shouldn't have been lieutenants, and they now they're taking all those responsibilities, and people just weren't doing their work, and to find time between the meetings and dealing with issues, some issues that you had to deal with, you just ran out of time, I believe. And sometimes, as you guys know, you'd be sitting at home trying to eat dinner while you're talking to the lieutenant on the phone about why he's not doing his audits, or what's going on with the use of force, or a medical trip going on, whatever's going on. Or AW call you just to call you to pick your brain.
Yeah. Look at how fast they want people to move up through the bureau. Yeah, Gary.
Well, I'm sure the training, whether it was 1950 or 59 or today, has always been a challenge. I think the Bureau of Prisons works real hard at trying to provide training and mentorship, and we have all these programs, and we had the same type of stuff in the state. The problem is, I think that they're looking at the wrong people to do it. When we all came in the Bureau of Prisons, GS8 was one step away from God. I mean, if you're a brand new officer, you didn't go talk to a lieutenant or a captain. You never went in a captain's office other than seeing him in the hallway. You didn't talk to him. You talked to the GS8 that were on shift, and they would guide you and tell you the right thing to do. And this is policy. This is how we do it. And but I think the Bureau of Prisons, they see a real need for training. They see a real need for mentorship. I just think they look at the wrong people to do it. We have GS 7s and 8 officers out there that have been in the Bureau of Prisons longer than any of us were, and like working a housing unit. They do it well, and the only reason they didn't move up is because they like what they do and they love correctional services. That's kind of frowned on almost. If you go and talk to a warden or an associate warden or even a regional director, I think, about using them as a mentor, it's kind of frowned upon. Like they're not good enough to provide mentoring to a fellow correctional officer. And I think some of that is union motivated, and some of that is just pure ignorance. They should be the ones that are providing that mentorship. And there's formal and there's informal, but most of my officers didn't want to go up and talk to a food service administrator about being mentored.
And I could tell you the last captain's conference was a real eye-opener for me. When the last one we were all together at, I don't remember what year that was, but we went into one of the classes, and as soon as I sat down in there, it was a guy from D.C. who had taught the same class when I was a lieutenant the first time, and then when I was a younger lieutenant, and then when I went to, I forget what else they sent us to. What was the leadership one they sent us to? And he'd been there every time. And he started off the class with, "This is the 53rd time I've taught this class." And I thought, why? Why is it the 53rd time that this person is going to teach this class? Because it's nothing against him. If I teach a class 53 times, nobody wants to hear it anymore, and they're not learning anything new. And then when I went to D.C., I had the opportunity to plan the next captain's conference, which we didn't have because of COVID. But one of the things I kept pushing was, we're the only place, you're not going to find a business out there, IBM or I don't know, name some big business. They don't bring in their own people to teach leadership. they bring in somebody else from the outside. And so I was trying to do that, and it was impossible. They would not let somebody from the outside come in and bring those new ideas. And I think that's part of it. We have captains that are teaching lieutenants. We have lieutenants that are teaching officers. We have AWs that are teaching captains. But are we vetting them to make sure they're the best instructor, like you said? Sometimes it's just whoever's available that week's going to go to captain's training. That's who's going to teach the captains. And so I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. Do you have anything there?
Everybody gets their 8 automatically now. You don't even have to put in for it anymore.
Well, just going back on what you guys already talked about a little bit about what it was when we started and what it is when we left. I think it goes back to what we originally talked about was the mindset of people today. Back when we started, you had people wanting to get those roles of leadership. As Gary said, the GS8s were short of God in a prison. And if you had to talk to a lieutenant, it's probably because you were in trouble. Or if you had to talk to a captain, you were definitely in trouble just about, or you saw him in the hallway and he might have acknowledged you. But you had people assuming those responsibilities. By the time I left, you had people, I should be a GS8 because I've been in the Bureau 5 years or 3 years. Not because I know how to do the jobs, not because I care about instructing younger officers, but I should get it because I want more money because I've come to work once a week for the last 5 years. So it's a sense of entitlement as opposed to a sense of responsibility anymore. And GS8s make more than GS9s now, so they had trouble getting 9 lieutenants before. I hate to see it now. Because again, it's going to go back to somebody that actually has it in them to do it. And Mike, you've heard me say this before. I don't know I'm sure we talked about it, Gary, but anybody can be a manager, but only certain people can be leaders.
Right.
And it just seems like the way things are going, they're not breeding leaders like they
and Mike, with that said, what Glenn said about automatic GS, that's a perfect threshold there. That's your perfect stepping stone into giving the lieutenant what they have coming. And being a lieutenant's not about the money, but at the same time, when you go out on a medical trip and your officers are making more money than you are because of some silly rule, give the lieutenants what they have coming. You want to make it an automatic GS8? Hey, no harm done. You're throwing more money at correctional services, and they probably deserve some of that. Then make a GS9 competitive, give them a little responsibility, bump your GS or your lieutenants to automatic GS10, instead of a 9, and throw a little more money at the lieutenants. I mean, a lieutenant shouldn't be making less than a school teacher or less than a counselor or some of these other positions that the Bureau of Prisons does a really poor job at that.
You guys have been on shift where you had 40, 50, 60 people working under you. Go out in the private sector and manage 60 people. You're making good money. You're making more than our lieutenants are. That's for damn sure. Yeah.
Well, if you guys remember the last conference we all were at in Kansas City, it was brought up when asked the question, it was brought up because I know I was one of them that chimed in. Pay your lieutenant. If you want to get people to be lieutenants, you want people to get captains, you got to give them incentive to do so. Yeah. If you want to be a lieutenant at a USP, pay them a little more than a lieutenant at an FCI. And I was scoffed at by the RD, I know. Oh, no, we can't do it for money. But yet they go make the automatic 8s for money. Yep. And I'm with you, Gary. I mean, pay the people what they deserve to pay. I think everybody should get paid more than what they're getting paid.
And to touch on that, Dennis. So, Glenn, you went from a captain and you lateraled over to training. So basically, you went from a position of the most responsibility, and you lateraled over to 13 training. How did that compare, Glenn? Can you tell us?
Wow.
I was all by myself. I was the only person in my department, so I had to supervise myself. And I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and I said, you know what? I got a lot of sick leave. It's time for me to go because things just weren't working like they should have been. I mean, I did the best I could, and even moving into that job, I didn't know what to expect really. It's kind of a fluke how I got the job. the warden asked me. I don't know, maybe he just saw the burnout in me. Maybe I'm not sure what, but I took it just to do something different. And there's no training, nobody from the region, because you got to remember, when I started in '93, there was EDMs and EDSs back then, and they seemed like they had a great job. And that's why it was a job that everybody was chasing when it came out again. And then I get the job, and I'm like, all right, so when are we going to training? Oh, no, not even training over the computer, or like training like this. Nothing. Just like, and there's all these HR programs you got to put the training in. I was like, I have no idea what you guys want me to do. So I kind of came up with my own thing, and I ran with it for a little while. Say again?
Did you get phone calls all night long?
I did. You know why? Because I'll tell you why. Because I'm retired and I can say whatever the hell I want now. Because the captain that replaced me didn't do a very good job, and he shouldn't have been in that position. And all the lieutenants kept calling me and said, "Hey, what should we do?" Okay, this is what you do.
It wasn't training related though, right?
So I heard on Facebook today, and there's a lieutenant that I think Dennis worked with him, and he's getting promoted. He was one of the best lieutenants that I had when I was up at Thompson. And one of the things that made him stand out above everything was he was such a motivator. And you guys know Thompson took a long time to activate. It kind of had, they didn't have a good plan for it when they started doing it. So motivation there was hard to keep up. But this lieutenant, he was able to motivate. He was able to lead. He was a natural leader, and I was really impressed with him. And so when I saw this on here, I just want to know what you guys think. And it says, every mark or action that a manager says or does affects the climate to the better or the worse. Where an unfavorable climate exists, people develop very slowly or along undesirable lines. In a favorable climate, that doesn't exist. How much did you realize when you went to becoming a captain, how much you and your attitude and your motivation, how much it was going to affect that entire institution? Or did it? Go ahead, Glenn.
I know when I went to when I left when I went to Yazoo City, that was probably I was the deputy captain at the low, and that was very difficult because, I mean, you guys all know how it works. Everybody gets vetted out before you even get there, and of course, Yazoo City's in the middle of the Mississippi Delta, and I was kind of going into a place where my skin complexion didn't jive very well with too many people. And I'll tell you what, the first day I was there, the union VP, I think she was, something like that, came in my office and she said, "Hey, we already know about you. We heard you're a racist, or you're this and you're that." I'm like, whoa. Like, hey, I've only been here for like 3 hours. And I just, I walked out and shut the door. I said, "Hey, when you're done with my office, I just shut the door behind you. I'll talk to you later." And after that, I was like, hey, I really got to change my mindset to adjust to my new environment the best I could. And I went 100%. Hey, let's motivate the troops. I've always considered myself to be like that anyways, to motivate the troops, to get them behind you as either a lieutenant or a captain. And we changed things there like you wouldn't believe. And within my 2 years before I left, that same person came up to me and she's like, "I'm really sorry, but I thought you were a different person." I said, "Well, you should have gave me a chance. That's on you." But we made some big changes at Yazoo. We implemented quite a few procedure things because, you guys heard all the horror stories about that place as far as the contraband and things like that. We changed a lot of good things there. And I brought that same attitude to Chicago, and Chicago had its own little issues also, and I was able to get all those guys pretty much on the same page. So
Right. So, Dennis, when I was at Thompson, I started off there as the deputy, and of course, you were the captain at the time. And as an officer and as a lieutenant, I still am, very rigid. I like rules. I like things to be a certain way. I remember when they used to have dress down days at Springfield. I would tell people, if you want to dress down, go be a secretary. You're an officer. I want you in uniform. And I didn't agree with a lot of that. I called it fluffy stuff that went on mainly for the secretaries and stuff. But then when I got to Thompson, Dennis, you had to kind of pull me aside and say, look, you're not just over custody now. You're over the entire institution. There's people looking at you from all departments, and you can't be that rigid custody person anymore. You got to expand, and you got to be part of the institution. And it was a hard change for me. I mean, you got me through it, but yeah, I had to stand up and be part of some of the, I don't even know what they were called, the different things, parties they had and stuff, and I'd have to go stand there and help serve hot dogs and stuff, thinking in the back of my mind, how come I'm not working? But tell me what your thoughts were about that. You were great at it, by the way.
Well, thank you. I don't know about great, but I appreciate the words. But I mean, no, I saw it early on when I started as captain at Leavenworth before I got to Thompson, and maybe even more so as lieutenant, as I was looking to maybe jump into the role of captain. I see it in the way I believed or still believe it is, if you're a good captain, everybody does look to you. And throughout all our careers, I think you can say that when the fecal matter hit the fan, yeah, who did you look for in situations? And generally, if you had a good captain, that was one of the people you were looking at for direction. Good lieutenants, good captains, depending on where in their careers or in your career, at some time you were looking at somebody that was a captain for advice, guidance, direction. So in turn, even in the huggy-feely days, the dress-down days, the hot dog serving days, or the ice cream social days, or whatever, if the captain wasn't participating, you really wouldn't want to participate, because if he ain't buying into it, why should I buy into it? That's the man or woman I look for advice and direction in a serious situation. So if they aren't buying into it, why would I buy into it? So again, you are kind of the focal point of the prison.
Sure.
So what you like and what you do is kind of what everybody else is going to gear themselves after, if they appreciate what you do. You got some that don't give a crap. They're going to do what they're going to do one way or another. But the ones that you think are good staff generally, or are producing as good staff, are looking at you, whether it's the lowest officer or the highest, the executive staff member. Some executive staff members still look at captains. They realize what they do. Some don't, as we've all had our marks and scratches, as Glenn said earlier. So you are the focal point.
Well, Mike, when I first made captain, I remember I had a little bit of a difficult time. The institution I was at had a pretty active union, and Glenn touched on that as well. And they didn't like me just because of my position. And in an institution like that, it only takes one or two people, a homesteader institution where nobody ever goes in or leaves. It only takes a couple of individuals with a voice in that institution to kind of crush you as a leader. But also, I was pretty introverted, so I don't need somebody coming up and patting me on the back all the time, or asking about my family, or that's not the kind of individual I am. That's not real important to me. I don't care about it. To me, work's work. It's business. And I never needed a lieutenant or the captain getting in my personal life and asking all these fluffy questions. So with that said, I didn't understand the importance, and there are a lot of people that do want that and do need that. Um, I was told by Nate W. after we had a conversation, and he gave me pretty good advice, and that was, it's not how you think you make people feel; it's how you actually make them feel that matters. So I had to kind of reassess and evaluate and realize that just because I'm kind of introverted and I don't want to talk to people all the time, it doesn't mean that in that position I don't have to, because I really did have to. And people took that as the fact that I wasn't talking to them a lot when I walked into a housing unit as, oh, the captain's arrogant, or he thinks he's better than us, or and that wasn't the case at all. I mean, if you looked out on the compound during mainline, I was one of the few out there shaking inmates down.
Glenn?
Yeah, I mean, I was so Carvalho was my warden at Pollock, right? And when I got picked up for captain at Yazoo, he's like, "Hey, let me give you some advice. Stop being a robot." Because I was Marine Corps, this and that and this and that. So I looked at myself. I was like, and I asked him, because at the time I was EPO at Pollock, and we used to have conversations all the time about talking to people and things like that, and he was pretty good at those conversations, and I found him very robotic at times too, and he's like, hey, you got to stop being robotic. You have to have a personality. Now you're going to be the captain. Everyone's going to be looking at you, like we've all said. You're the captain for that entire institution. Medical, you're the captain for medical. You might not even. I mean, I know when I got to Chicago, I would go to medical all the time. They had the best food in the place, right? And I'd go to their meetings. I'd do little. I'd go up there and do little training sessions with them about use of force and how to, properly do things on camera. Because we've all seen videos where the nurse gets up there and just totally blows the medical eval out of the water on camera, and you're just like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? Well, guess what? You, as a captain, you gotta go up there and talk to them. And same with the officers too. You gotta have that. It was hard for me too, because I'm the exact same way, Gary. I don't need to go in there and, hey buddy, how are you? How's your dog? No, I don't care. Did you do what you were supposed to do today? And that was, for me, it was really hard to do, is to step back from being a robot to actually having a personality and actually trying to smile once in a while. And that was hard for me.
There you go. There's a smile. So one of the things they talk about on here too is performance appraisals, which in my opinion is the most broke thing in the Bureau of Prisons. And it wasn't good at Missouri's Department of Corrections either. I worked there, and the performance appraisal system didn't ever discover who I was or what I was doing. It was always just filled out, Xeroxed, and sent. And you either made it through that year or you got in trouble. Here, and it's interesting because this is what we should be doing, and in 1959 they knew it. They wanted an employment development tool that's going to be called the employee appraisal. And this is going to do three things. It's going to talk about how well is he performing on his present job, what is the potential for promotion of this individual, and what needs to be done to help him reach his potential. Well, they sure lost what they started off doing, because that's not our performance appraisal system anymore. Do you guys agree that it's just broke, or is it was one of the most frustrating things? And I guess I'll say I spent 1 year, really, I sat down and I did everybody individual. And I sat down and did everything I could find good about them, bad about them, how they could improve, how they could promote. It was a ton of work. And they walked in, looked at it, and said, where do you want me to sign? It kind of deflated me that I put that much work into it, didn't get anything out of it. But is that because of the habit of the way we do it? Or is that truly what people want? What do you guys think? Go ahead, Dennis.
I'll step up. I mean, it's turned, I don't know when it changed, but I mean, I know ever since I started, it's been, do I get anything for this? Do I still have a job after this? Are you telling me I screwed up, or are you telling me I did good? I don't think they care too much. I mean, I always read them, and I'd catch my supervisor in copying and pasting because they'd have something from somebody else's eval in there, but it didn't really hurt my feelings. I still had a job. I think it's too convoluted. From what I understand, it came from a broken system, and the Bureau of Prisons bought it because it was cheap and stuck with it, and it's still a broken system. To get the outstandings that are expected, you have to change national policy. You got to save people's lives. You got to save a burning building from collapsing. And get 2 stray dogs out of there. It's mostly unachievable in a line officer's job or a secretary's job or a counselor's job.
And you can't promote without it, though.
Well, and that's what it's become, and that's what I'm saying. If you were looking for promotion and your supervisor gave you anything but an overall O, they just took a big dump on you. Some of them knew it. Some of them did it on purpose.
Right. So was I the only one, or did you guys also see where you might have a warden AW, somebody come down and say, okay, you can give out 6 outstandings this year? Not how is everybody doing, but you can give out 6 outstandings.
Yeah, that happened too many times. Or you're at the last, at the 12th hour of getting all your appraisal or all your performance evals in, and you're like, how many can I give? And you're like, oh, gee, you're like, all right, let me get the dice out. And you're like shooting dice to, I don't know. Because, I mean, all the evals read the same, Officer Johnson, he's a great communicator. He is, really. Last time I talked to Officer Johnson, he MF'd me a couple times, I think. So, those are tough. Those are tough to go through as a captain. And you sit there and you actually read them, and you're like, hey, LT, come in here and explain to me one more time why we're going to do this. Please tell me, because I think I missed something. So, or you got the guy or gal on morning watch who's got an outstanding for what? I mean, because, really on morning watch, what are you really doing? You're counting bodies. I mean, breathing bodies, but other than that, it's hard to rate somebody on that. And as a lieutenant doing those evals, you'd have to explain that to some people, and they just couldn't figure it out. Well, why didn't I get an outstanding? We were just walking around at night with a flashlight and counting people. So,
yeah. And sometimes you're taking money out of people's pockets. I remember I had a lieutenant retire from Thompson, and he'd had an incident that year, a bad decision made, or a couple. And so even though he was there, doing this and doing this, he also didn't do a couple other things. So I wasn't able to give him, and didn't feel like I should, an outstanding. Well, this was his last chance to get that bump just before he walked out the door, and he basically walked in there just mad as hell. You're costing me, $120 a month for the rest of my life, by not giving me an outstanding. Well, this shouldn't be based upon money. It should be based upon performance. And if that leads to promotion, then you get more money. That's kind of the way I look at it. Gary, any thoughts?
Yeah, I just think the eval system we use is just it's irrelevant. I mean, none of us would have moved up through the ranks had we not gotten good evals, because they look at it and give it a lot of points, and like it's pretty important. But at the same time, I've read a lot of evals for this individual and this individual have the same write up in the same element, and this one's getting an O and this one's getting exceeds. So what's the value in that? Because it's so subjective. What's the value? You kind of almost have to be able to quantify what you're assessing them on. Like, do they come to work? How many days of work have they missed? That and why did they miss it? Do they wear their appropriate uniform? Do they do their job correctly? You almost have to do it on stuff that everybody can see. Because when you're giving 2 people the same write up and one gets no and the other one doesn't, because the warden says you only have 10% of your people can get an O that year.
I think it's.
I just don't see the value in it the way they do it.
Yeah.
Well, like you mentioned earlier, with the warden giving you a list of, all right, you guys got 6 in your department. Every department's got 6 they can hand out. Well, unit team only has 6 people in their department, so they get all those. And then as a captain, I mean, one of the lovely things, you got to go back and try to schmooze over everybody. Say, okay, we get 6 this year.
Let me look here real quick. So I think, we're at about an hour. I think I'll finish up. Anything else you guys want to say about, I know you got to read that captain's conference. Anything you guys want to bring up?
You read through those minutes, and of course, a lot of the writing's a little bit different than we would write today. But it is ironic, inmates haven't changed, and inmates are inmates. And something that I saw when I left the state and came to the Bureau of Prisons is they really like to muddy the waters. Watching inmates is a pretty simple task when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it. The backbone of your institution's correctional services. I'll always stand by that. They're the most important element that you can't live without in a prison setting. And we put a lot of other things into the Federal Bureau of Prisons at least, and I think a lot of the state systems kind of follow what we do, or just align themselves relatively closely with the programs and the education and all the release efforts, and we just do a lot of other things that I'm not saying they're not important, but they're not the nuts and bolts of working with inmates. And you can see back then correctional services probably was a little bit more of the mainstream, the main power within that institution, and kind of what the focus was. I do think that's probably changed today. I mean, if you look at our senior executives.
Right. Well, and I think we touched on it there. It's easier to go become an AW coming from food service with an O, or coming from unit team with an O. Being a captain and walking out of there with an O is a hard damn thing to do. You're under the most scrutiny in that institution constantly. And I think that does keep a lot of them from having that opportunity to move up. But yeah, that's just my thought on that. One more thing before we go, and just because, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the bad things as far as evals and getting O's as a captain, I ran across personally. I had on a few different occasions executive staff say, well, we don't really consider you a department head. Although you're not really truly executive staff, but you're in all the executive staff meetings and everything. So they look at you as executive staff when it comes to evals too. And, they aren't trying to dole those out to everybody because everybody can talk. So, yeah, you had to bring them to light. Well, I am a department head. So, if you're doing this appropriately, I'm the largest department, most staff in my department, most responsibility in my department.
Yeah. And I think I told Glenn this not too long ago. So I go up to the office of the warden, and they had just bought brand new chairs, and they were these nice desk chairs with, they had bureau symbol on the back, embroidering on it. And so I walked in there and I'm like, yeah, which one of those is mine? I'm running it back to the office. And they said, no, you're not executive staff. I was like, oh, okay, fine. So I sit down for closeout. I'm sitting there at the deal, and here comes the executive assistant, and she's got this envelope. I'm taking money from all the executive staff for, okay, so am I executive staff or am I not? Depends on whether or not there's something coming. But so let me ask this question before we get out of here. The Bureau, and I think I'll say out loud for everybody, we all love the Bureau. We had great careers. I don't want anybody thinking that we have anything to say bad about the Bureau. We would love to see some of this stuff help the Bureau. But the Bureau's had a tough time in the news lately, and they're getting a new director, Colette Peters. She's coming out of the Oregon State Correctional System, and I think she's going to be different than anything the Bureau's ever had before, just from what I'm reading in the news. She kind of leans towards some She's been over to Denmark, kind of likes the way they do things over there in a different system with
Here's Norway, actually.
Norway. Okay. And so what do you guys think? Well, they brought in Mark Inch. He was the first one that wasn't part of the Bureau that moved up to director. So he only lasted like, I don't know, 8 months. And so she's going to be the second one.
6 months.
6 months. So what do you guys think? Any thoughts on Colette Peterson becoming the new director?
Well, it was funny. I was actually going to bring this up today. I was listening to I guess they had some issues down in a county facility in New Orleans, and it was funny how it's a very, I guess maybe a liberal type of sheriff that's running those county jails down there, and the inmates, during what she was talking about was how they had a disturbance over the weekend and how they were trying to negotiate with the inmates and trying to help with their demands and things like that. And I'm just like, man, like, what are you guys thinking? I mean, I'm sorry to say, but inmates know one thing. They know one thing. Inmates, just like Gary said, inmates are inmates. They know one thing, violence. That's it. That's what they know. If you treat them with little padded gloves and, furry gloves and you pat them on the back, guess what? They're going to take advantage of you in a freaking heartbeat. And then just like you're talking about the new director, reading a few things about that, because I try not to care anymore, but everyone, you're still going to look it up, right? And you're like, the way the Norwegian jails are, it's more like it's like a social club. They all have their own little cell and they get to move around as much as they want. I mean, hey, good luck to you guys. Good luck to you guys, because I know when. Oh, and the lady that was the sheriff that running the county jails down in New Orleans, she calls them clients. I mean, I remember not too long ago we had a director. Hey, we're going to call them clients. No, that lasted like about a day, I think. I don't think it ever came out of my mouth except with a good chuckle behind it. But I mean, it's not that easy, And hey, good luck to you guys. Good luck to you guys. I don't know how they're going to do it, but good luck.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the same sentiments here. Yeah, everybody wants to judge our correctional facilities on theirs and how theirs is run, how compared to how ours is run, their numbers to our numbers. We have a different law system in this country. We don't cut people's hands off for stealing. We don't cut feet off for doing other things. We don't cut other things off for doing other things. We put them in prison. So obviously our population is a larger population. As said several times today, inmates are inmates. Inmates know respect. Whether they honor it or not, they know respect. And if you give them everything when they cry, it's kind of like today's generation of the kids. No more corporal punishment, no more spanking them, because that might scar them and mess their mental state up for the rest of their life, heaven forbid. So we'll just talk it out with a 2-year-old. Well, 2-year-old doesn't understand talking it out. 2-year-old understands if they do something bad and they get smacked on the butt and it hurts, they'll quit doing something bad. Kind of the same philosophy. So, not saying we beat up people or nothing like that, but there was punishments for actions. Well, when there's no punishments for actions, you're seeing it on the street now. Yep. With the defund the police, kind of the same concept. Get rid of the police force, get rid of the punishment, the crime starts rising. Well, and it said again, just repeating. I feel sorry for the staff now in that sense, and I wish them all the best. But it's going to be a rough road to hoe if they continue down that path to where they want to make it like Norway or wherever. Because again, their penal system's different than our penal system, and ours has to be ran different. And that's one of the bad things I do that I've said for years with the Bureau of Prisons. Bureau of Prisons is one of the top leading correctional environments in the world. A lot of places look to them. Even now, even with a lot of bad press, they still look to the Bureau of Prisons for guidance, advice, however you want to say it. But the Bureau of Prisons isn't too apt on putting their business out. they're really restrictive of what we do or what they do, to where they don't want to tell people.
Right.
They don't want to share the knowledge and the ability. So all you hear is the bad guy's version of it, or the family of the bad guy's version of it, or the politician that saw a jail on TV once and they know every prison's ran like it is on TV.
Yeah. I would love for the public to see more of what a correctional officer goes through, what a correctional lieutenant goes through on a shift, the lives they save every day for a public who doesn't recognize what they do. I can hundreds of lives that I saved over the years, especially working at Springfield. I mean, we stop suicides all the time there, and you never hear any of that. You never get that recognition. So if she wants transparency, that's really what I would like to see, is some transparency about what does go on in there, because I'm not scared of what the camera shows. I worked in there a long time, and that camera could follow me 99.9% of the time. Don't want them in there while I'm in the bathroom. But, I hope there is some of that transparency. I hope she does. There are things to be fixed, without a doubt. Like we talked about, the appraisal system, promotions, pay, working conditions. I'd like to see them shut down some of these camps. As a taxpayer, it just drives me nuts that I'm paying for inmates to sit around in the camp and watch TV, and they're not mowing lawns. They're not doing anything anymore. But I guess that's my 2 cents. So let me close this out. First, I want to thank you guys. I appreciate you doing this. I think I'm going to call this the Captain's Table, and maybe we'll get together and we can do this some more. I think it's interesting. I think people that listen to the Prison Officer podcast are definitely going to get something from it, and they're definitely going to love hearing more than just my opinion, because it's not everything, of course. So, Glen MacDonald, thank you for being here. Dennis Treadway, thank you for being here. And Gary Cooper, I appreciate you guys, and we'll do this again soon.
Thanks,
guys.
If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button, or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.